morning, David. Good morning, Sims. How are you? It being a little bit after 8:30 here on Wednesday, February 25th, let's call the meeting of this stakeholders panel to order. And we do not have, as I understand it, any minutes to approve today. So I guess at this point I'll turn it right over to Stacy and put it in your hands.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, so today's agenda, we're going to talk about septage management. So as people saw in the draft language agreement that I sent out, it did have a clause about septage. We have not gotten to that full discussion yet, so that discussion is this morning. But you did get the materials in advance to review for that. Then we'll talk about the adaptive management plan that you saw that was sent out, at least the NOSIT draft plan was sent out. And then the second part of the meeting, we will talk about the draft consensus statement and the draft warrant. So that's really our tasks for today. As we get to those sections, I'll say a little bit more about how they will proceed. But our hope is that we can manage to change and adapt and add to and fix the consensus statement such that we actually can get consensus on today. That's a goal. If we don't, and we have to do more work to figure out what needs to get changed and fixed for next time, then we'll do that however we have to go. And then before the end of the meeting, we'll do a brief update on the financial analysis as well. The ground rules, as always, please be respectful, please be concise in your comments, be on task when we're talk about the things that we're talking about, and please be constructive. Talk about if there are things you don't like, how we make them better, etc. Action items. So I sent out the draft meeting summary. I've gotten a couple of comments already that I am working to integrate. In terms of action items, I did hear from the Orleans Citizens Forum. They're having a meeting on March 2nd, and they're going to suggest some dates that they think might be useful to talk about wastewater planning for their forum in the spring, and they will give us a couple of dates that they think would work, and I will then, as soon as they send those to me, I'll send them to all of you to see if I can get your input on those. Radio options, so as Griffin mentioned at the last meeting, we do have some potential to put information on some radio stations, and the question still is what we're going to put on them. So my hope is, again, if we have our consensus, if we finalize a consensus agreement, then that is really would serve as the content of what we want to put forward, both in the newspaper and on the radio as our outreach. So I haven't proceeded with putting anything else in the paper because it feels like we're so close, maybe. If at the end of this meeting we don't have a consensus, then maybe what we'll do is use the executive summary, or I can sort of combine the last two executive summary for the meetings as an update, so people will at least be able to know where we are via radio and newspaper. I think all of the other things have been done. We didn't end up sending out a poll because we just weren't quite there yet, I think, on the financial. They need to really be, Mike will give an update on that when we get to it, but that didn't happen for you. But I think everything else we've been posting and sending out all of the materials to all of you and trying to get all that updated. Is there anything, any comments, anything missing?
Stacy.
Yeah.
Kevin Galligan, alternate from Conscom. And again, you had asked this, I think, in terms of outreach, particularly on the financial management plan to report back. And
I have.
this kind of fits the outreach, and frankly, after 4 hours, I'll probably forget this point. But since we do meet practically every week, we did have a deliberation of financial management discussion for the Conservation Commission, and it was the sense, based upon the alternative technologies, distribution across town, the equity fairness thing, to be more an advocate for funding the cost of the system 100% from the tax base. So we had a lengthy discussion, and that's what the group wanted to share.
Okay, great, thanks. And when we get to the financial discussion, we'll bring that point back up as well. Anyone else had outreach that you want to share, things you've heard from constituents? Yeah.
Yeah, I spend a lot more time than I'd like to on the telephone with people or people I meet around the community. And there are people who sit in this session or watch on video who really don't understand what's happening here. I mean, they're confused because and I take that from the questions that are asked. And we had a comment at the end of the last meeting. Someone stood up and commented about the 300,000 gallon a day plant to go at Namskake at Marsh, and also used a bunch of other statistics, and I don't know where. I mean, I know where that came from, but it's not real, and people. There are comments and discussions that go on like that are disconnected from what happens here, and also know that a great number of people. There's not a lot of people in town that are even aware of what goes on around this table, or that there is such a thing. And that's concerning going forward to town meeting. I'll leave it on the table as that, but I think we got to get the message out, and I think we've made some good progress and got a good approach to talk about with people, and something that people might even like if they were aware of what the composition of it is. That's and we do a lot of outreach, conference calls and meetings and that sort of thing. So we do get together. Just because I don't speak up about all this, it's going on in the background.
Great. Yeah, so I think, we haven't put anything in the newspaper lately. There hasn't been there have been one or two articles there, but that's clearly a priority to at least make sure that people know what's going on. The radio is another method. Do people have other thoughts about what else we could be doing as a group, or how we can be helping the support team to get that message out?
I think we ought to organize a presentation discussion forum and do it in Snow Library on, I don't know, Saturday morning or sometime when people can come around. We ought to do it at least once in March, at least once in April, and hopefully before town meeting. I don't know. I don't keep those dates in my mind, but 2 or 3 of those where people have opportunities. I mean, I know Paul and I have done some on some of the science things, and you can get 100 people come out, and of course that's not the whole town, but it's a good opportunity, and people get to ask questions. Whereas in the newspaper, they read it, they get a bit of it, but if they don't understand it, then well, they don't know who to pick up the telephone and call, and they probably won't call anyone. That's what it is. So that's one.
What do people think about that idea?
I think we should try to get an idea of how many people we think are going to come, because the library's 125. At that point, they cut you off. The fire department cuts you off. You might want to think about the high school or the middle school auditorium, just because you can fit more people in it.
Yeah,
I would hate to turn people away.
I'd hate to do that too.
Yeah.
Just on the idea, I think it's a really good idea.
Okay. Sims?
It's probably going to require some additional resources, but I mean, we have tried the press, we're videoing these, and previous comments suggest that there's still a lot of unfamiliar people out there, maybe a bulk mailing to every mailing address in Orleans.
That's a good idea.
With a schedule of events going forward as known at whenever that mailing is done. Rather than a single event, list the resources for the information.
Other thoughts about that? So just to get a sense, how many people think it's a good idea we should really try to have some public events, maybe have a mass mailing to tell people about the events and an overview of what this group has been doing? How many people like that idea? Anyone think that's a bad idea or are nervous about that idea in some way? All right, so we will work to try and see what we can make happen. Thanks. And, my view is an event like that should feature you guys, like you're the presenters, right? You are the panel. You are now the experts to inform the group. So we can think about how we have some subset of people and maybe for different events. But I think, it's not about me or Mike or Stantec. It's got to be about you guys, right?
Now ask your question about, is anybody nervous?
Yeah, now are you nervous, right? And I've done these kinds of things. As often when when I'm doing a collaborative process with a small group of representatives, we also have some public events, and we structure it so that the panel is the presenter. Right, so we can figure out a good way to do that. I can help draft a presentation or things like that. So we can figure that out.
Stacy, just to comment, last week, some people in this room were present. Mike Dominic and I made a presentation to about 20 people about the CLF decision and where we were in this process. And most of the people were very interested and appreciative of the fact that we had taken a step back. We've looked at everything again, and we're coming back with some different ways of approaching this. And at least one person said, when I pointed out that the regulators are beginning to look at things a little differently now with alternative, non-traditional technologies, this person made a comment, well, maybe it was worthwhile waiting for a while. But I think universally they appreciated the fact of getting an update on what this process was, which is incredibly complex with 40 to 50 people in a room for 11 meetings at 4 hours of meeting, and they're still here even in the snow. So,
Yeah, it's great.
I would suggest that you get out a bulk mailing first before you have a public meeting so that people have something to get excited around.
All right, so let's touch back on this at the end of the meeting, just so we have a sense of where we are by the end of the meeting, and then, given where we are, how we want to move that forward. Does that make sense? Okay. Great. So with that, I will move us into septage management options discussion. And I think the key document for this is the Board of Selectmen Tri-Town, which is not in the packet originally, so I'll get that out now while Mike.
Stacy, is it an email?
Yes, this is what I emailed, so it's just if you didn't.
What do you think the over-under is on attendance tonight?
Yep.
Thank you. Set.
Well, good morning. You have the packet. I spared you the slide presentation which this isn't amenable to anyway, because there's some details in here and some tables and stuff that it's very, that wouldn't convey through slides. So I'm going to pretty much talk through this document, highlighting the key issues as we go along. There's a lot of backup to this. The Stantec memo on the septage market study and options at the plant is background to this. What I tried to do is pull information from that and summarize it, and then go further in terms of the analysis of what that means with regard to the wastewater component at Tri-Town site, if this group chooses to go that way. There's a synergy there that this really tries to bring out. And so I'll go through this really page by page. The first figure 1 you've seen before, basically the timeline and key steps to the board's decision on the Tri-Town facility. And the board's been focusing their monthly workshops on this quite intensely. So as we go forward, we'll talk about a number of the factors here in the decision timeline and as we go forward. Table 1 is a summary of the projected septage quantities at Tri-Town. This has been a subject of a lot of discussion. There's a number of variables here that come into play. There's one thing for sure, that as long as there is a lower in Outer Cape, as long as the towns from Brewster to Provincetown are there is going to be wastewater and there is going to be septage. That's one thing we do know. So the question is what to do with it, and how much will there be? This table from the Stantec report, it's modified from that report. The Stantec report had a table of projected septage quantities, but it was based on the CWMP, which we're not looking at, and it didn't include some other things. There's been suggestions that the septage quantities could decline significantly, especially with a management program. If we had, as Tri-Town has had in the past, Mr. Kelly tells me, wasn't here, but that they did have a septage management program and inspected and measured the depth of solids in the tanks. That was in existence before. It could be done again. The question about the efficacy of that and how much that would reduce the actual volume of septage to Tri-Town is a question, because although Orleans and possibly if Brewster and Eastham were together with Orleans, they could affect those communities. If the IMA isn't in place, Orleans can only affect Orleans, and that's about 10% of the volume to Tri-Town with the management program. So let's come back, Paul. Let me just finish this point. So it could affect Orleans. Other towns could do the same thing, but one of the questions there is, what would that extension of time between pumpings be? And we did gather information over the last few weeks on exactly what the pumping rate is in Orleans, the pumping frequency. And when you look at the data, relatively small percent of the septic systems in town are pumped every 3 years. In fact, there's a high percent of them are not pumped for 6 years. Some even longer than that. So that is and also the number varies quite a bit from year to year, because people rent their place, they don't rent their place, so they're not here, or they're there all the time. So that number varies quite a bit. It's not if we do this, then we get this percent reduction. What that reduction would be is questionable. The other factor is that the actual cost, as we're going to talk about in a minute, of adding septage to a new facility is relatively small. So whether we're talking about 20,000 gallons a day or 25,000 gallons a day, average 365 days a year, it's really lost in the capital cost of the new facility. The actual capital cost of that septage and the operating cost is a very small increment of what it would take to build and operate the wastewater plant. So that's a key factor. So while we may, and the other factor is the management program has a cost. to have people go out and inspect and keep records of and pump or direct the pumping of those facilities, you're taking responsibility for that, which is an interesting point in itself. You're now taking responsibility for people's septic systems and their leach fields. And if that leach field fails, whose responsibility is it now, if in fact the town has that management program? So there's issues there about it. The efficacy and productivity of that kind of plan is not clear, and the cost savings of it are not clear either. Nevertheless, it could be the right thing to do. Some towns are doing that, and that's something we will continue to evaluate going forward. This number here, then I'll get to your question, Paul, or comment. This number here, 22,000, seems like a reasonable number that's a reasonable percent reduction from where we are now, but also a factor of safety in there that, and a conservative, so you're not under-designing a facility and having trucks drive past the Tri-Town facility and losing the revenue if in fact you build it. So that's where this, where we're using roughly the 22,000 that you'll see going forward. Paul, question?
I think your projections are rosy, and I handed out to everybody at the table a single page with a report that was put out in 1994 by Terry Bounds. And what he did is he monitored 450 septic tanks very carefully. And he also monitored another 215 in the city of Montesano in Washington. And he came up with this table, which you see before. It's copied directly out of his document, which is referenced. And he concluded with 95% confidence, according to his paper, if there are 3 people year-round on a property, the pumping interval should be 11 years.
Paul, is this for conventional septic tanks?
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
So it's not step systems?
These are step tanks, but they're monitored because they're under controlled conditions. It has nothing to do with the step system. It's what the solids and scum accumulation rates are. It's what this has.
Does it include commercial systems?
You'd have to read the document.
This is, we have, one of the
Wait a
issues
minute.
here is the commercial area of
I
town.
understand, and that's a small percentage of the total, but it may be a larger fraction of the wastewater. I understand that. But it also suggested that with 2 people in a property, which is most of Orleans, I understand, the year-round people, the interval might be as much as 22 years. Now, I don't know about other people in the room, but I used to get a postcard from the Board of Health reminding me to pump every 3 years, and I think a lot of people may have done that. Now, last April, I had an inspection of my septic system, which is 29 years old, and it passed. It's fine. But the record showed that there was only 1 inch of sludge and 3 inches of scum in the septic tank. So am I supposed to pump every 3 years?
Well, I think one of the factors
See,
there, Paul,
I think
one of the factors there is that I think you probably pay more attention to your septic tank than most people. You've been engaged in this for some time. You watch that. I don't know if I can tell you when the last time my septic tank was pumped.
But
And most people are in that category. So the DEP requirements for that are specified really for a reasonable condition, that recognizing that the consequence of not doing that means a failed leach field, which is tens of thousands of dollars replacement. So they're conservative there for that reason.
But what they're suggesting in these reports, and you can read them, is that you don't have to pump as frequently as every 3 years, and monitoring should not be that expensive.
Who is Mr. Bounds with?
What difference does it make?
Well, because I
He's
think
a
he's
professional-
affiliated with a company that sells step systems.
But they don't sell septic tanks, okay?
Every system that has, just about every system that's gone into a step goes in thinking that they're going to use the existing facilities. 90% of them are replaced.
That's
So,
irrelevant.
guys, I don't want to get into like
It's irrelevant.
an argument about this. If there's a need for further discussion about assumptions about septage, Paul, we can do that, right? But let's keep going. Let's sort of see where we go and see how, in the end, how critical is that difference even in what we're trying to figure out together here anyway, right?
I think it's a big difference.
One of the things I was going to say later, but I'll say it now for what it's worth, is, I've looked at these numbers too, and the figures that are beyond this, and I think it's probably prudent that we look at the sensitivity of the capacity to, what the expectations is in terms of flow, and also the sensitivity of that in terms of the revenue stream that we get from it. So that we, because I just did some back-of-the-envelope calculations, and on a back-of-the-envelope basis, it makes a difference in the amount of capital and it makes a difference in the amount of revenue, but you can, fine-tuning this too much can be problematic too, and the other is that we've got time between now and when we make a decision to fine-tune that capacity depending on what we learn.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That's it.
I think what Paul's saying is that, maybe these numbers are a little high. It depends upon, what happens. And I think a more important thing is really to talk about, the management system. So, should we be inspecting a program where tanks get inspected and if they only have 2 or 3 or 4 inches of sludge, then maybe those don't get pumped for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. You pump them when they need to be pumped, not just pump them for the sake of pumping them. And I have no idea, how the numbers would add up, but it might be less.
If you see the note below the table where he states that even now, this is 20 years later, they still pump on a 10 to 12-year interval for 3 or 4 people in a property, but they don't monitor as frequently. So once they get a track record going, they can stretch the monitoring.
That's presuming that you have a year-round resident, that there's no change in the occupancy, that there's not summer seasonal
But that's
issue.
why you monitor.
Well, that
You said you
changes,
don't have to know how
the
many
monitoring
people are in
program for that is very, we're in the weeds here. This is not a significant factor in strategic decisions you've got to
I think
make.
it is.
Jim.
And we're talking about Tri-Town, and we're talking about what's at home. It's still all got to go to Tri-Town,
Yeah.
and we have the numbers for what has gone through Tri-Town. So
Yeah.
we know those numbers, whether it's pumped every week or it's pumped every 10 years. We know what goes through Tri-Town. And so I think we have the Tri-Town numbers. What we don't have is how often do we have to.
I wouldn't want to bet that that's going to go down
No.
50% or 75%, as some are predicting.
Eventually, it's got to go
Okay.
through Tri-Town.
Let's move on. The sheet 1 is from the Stantec report, basically looking at the options to Tri-Town, looking at the on-Cape options and the off-Cape options. You can read it yourself. Basically, the bottom line is that there's some capacity in Yarmouth Dennis facility during the off-season, not year-round. The next reasonable, the next really feasible option is Wareham, which is 57 miles away, 114 miles round trip. So there is a market and a reliability to that market for the Orleans facility, and that's been proven through the years. The next slide is an interesting, or the next sheet, page 5, is an interesting point. The third bullet, current tipping fees. There's been a lot of discussion on the elasticity of the tipping fee and how, and can it be raised to generate more revenue or can be lowered to generate more volume. And the analysis that Stantec did, and as we've talked to the operator there, it seems like it's relatively inelastic. Lowering the tipping fees doesn't bring more septage to the plant. It is a relatively well-defined market. You've got some border somewhere between Brewster and Dennis, and Outer Cape, it's not going to change, so the market stays the same. Raising the fees doesn't generate more revenue because on that border between Brewster primarily into Dennis, If Jay raises the rate a penny, according to what he's saying, the haulers play the market, and they'll go to Dennis Yarmouth if they can. So, and they do that for a couple of months. Jay loses the revenue from like Ocean Edge, and all of a sudden, because his margin is so slim to begin with, he's somewhat operating right at the brink of breaking even as it is. When he loses 5-10% of that, it's now not worth it for him to raise his fees. So within a few months, he goes back, and Ocean Edge comes back. So it's a very well-balanced market right now. It looks like the current...
I just wanted to see if I can pull this up
But
onto the screen.
Yeah.
Gary's going to try and see if he can just pull the packet up, so people who don't have this packet
Oh.
are able to follow along, and the people who are watching at home
Okay.
are able to follow along. So you can keep going, but he's going to just
Okay.
try and pull this up.
So it looks like the market is relatively well-known, and Jay is managing it quite well. Next slide is regarding the options. The board asked me a month or 6 weeks ago to look more closely at this and what the options are, particularly in light of the IMA and what the framework of the IMA calls for. And at this point here, the Orleans vote to continue operation is a no. As you know, there's a warrant article to continue with the process, including a design of demolition of the facility. The board is evaluating that now. Looks like under just about any option we pick, except rehabilitating the plant, any of the options we're looking at, from demolition to any of the wastewater options, would require demolition. So it's just a timing issue. So the question is, does the decision of this group regarding wastewater at Tri-Town open avenues to reconsider the options with Tri-Town? And that's really what this is about. If you come to the Orleans vote to continue operation and you go down the yes side of this, it opens up 4 or 5 options, actually. There's 4 listed here we'll talk about with regard to what to do with Tri-Town. And this is what the rest of the memo builds on. Option 3, upgrade the existing facility for 20 years as a septic facility only, no wastewater. Option 4A, keep the existing facility and build new wastewater and septic plant. Keep the existing facility and build a new regional wastewater and septic plant. 4C is option 1, demolish the plant. And 4A, proceed to build a new facility. What that does is it produces a gap. The existing facility is demolished, and there's somewhere between 2 to 3, maybe 4 years, somewhere in there, a range we're not quite certain on yet, that the sludge septic market would be going someplace else, probably to Wareham. So there's a gap there. 4D fills that gap with a transfer station. It says, okay, we're going to demolish the plant, build a transfer station, an interim transfer station, until the new plant's online, and take that transfer station offline. So those are the options.
I know we're under the gun in terms of the next 3 years and making decisions. And I also know that there was some funds allocated to do the vegetative studies. How does that, within Nantucket Marsh itself, how does that play into any of these options, if at all? And I know we're not talking about effluent disposal, but does it play any factor at all with regard to the size and scope of the plant that's there? And when are these studies planned to be done, I guess?
Yeah, the NAMSCAKIT studies won't influence the decision on Tri-Town.
Okay.
That's more of a restoration protection of the marsh as it is.
Okay.
The decision to relocate the discharge from NAMSCAKIT to another place will affect this, of course. Number 1, finding a discharge location, then the number 2, the sizing of it and other aspects of it. So.
Okay, thank you.
Question, Mike? Just one quick one on your overview slide, and I think you might have touched on it at one of your other meetings, but in addition to continued operation, did you actually quantify what the avoided costs would be to citizens that might have to pay higher fees for septic disposal?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, that's in here, and we'll get to that. It's on the
Great.
breakdown. To look at it, oh, Brian, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point that I think, a lot of what's been driving this is the permit and the expiration date of the permit. And originally under the 2010 CWMP, the discussion about demolishing Tri-Town and having that gap was really predicated on the size of the plant, and that there was not available space to be able to build that projected size plant and maintain Tri-Town. With the current proposal in a scaled down
Size
of the plant, that may not still hold true, and that it is possible that you would be able to maintain Tri-Town as an existing facility while you simultaneously build the plant. Therefore, there is no gap in service. And I think we would be very amenable, as long as there is a commitment, an approved plan to move forward, to look at how we would continue to permit on an interim basis Tri-Town under existing conditions without having to expend a lot of money in bringing it up to, a 30-30-10-10 standard. It right now is the 30-30-50 standard. And so I think we would be able to look at that either over a traditional 5-year period for the permit, or we could do something less. So I think there's some flexibility in there that will allow service to continue. You don't have a gap. You don't run the risk of losing a customer base that you then have to bring back and hopefully, maintain some continuity while the rest of the plan gets implemented.
Thank you. The other factor there is the relocation of the discharge opens up that area on the site that's used now for the rapid infiltration basin, so that gives more flexibility in the layout of the plant that would accomplish that as well. So, Table 2 on page 7 is a much larger spreadsheet that was summarized down to basically, in the lower right column, compute the incremental cost. I can do that if I just go to the next page. Okay. Not good at this. Okay, this is where we are. Sorry. That number in the lower right is the incremental cost it would take if you were building the wastewater plant for that's in the hybrid. What percentage of that cost would be the cost that's attributed to septage in terms of receiving, treatment, chemicals, whatever you have to do for septage? So I took the cost of the wastewater plant, subtracted out the items that relate to the septage part of it only, and you get the number in the lower right, which is $3 million for the cost of a septage component of a wastewater plant. And that number is significant going forward.
So, Mike, just if I can draw a chance, so what you're saying is if the panel agrees that building a plant that's going to treat wastewater from the downtown area at Tri-Town is a sensible direction to go in, then to add in septage for that plant the estimated additional cost is somewhere in the range of $3 million.
Right.
Is that accurate?
That's right.
Okay. So, I mean, I just want to point that out in the context of how much septage are we going to get and what's the market going to be? And, you know, if the cost is $3 million, how much uncertainty can we handle? Right? How much septage do we know we would need to get to be able for this not to be a money-losing arrangement?
Well, the interesting thing is, and Stantec engineers can address this better than I can, but with a wastewater plant, right now, the septage facility only is delicately balanced financially on receiving almost a guaranteed amount of septage. Their costs have to be driven and have to be lowered actually to take that, to make it financially attractive, viable. With a wastewater plant, that's not the case anymore. You can take 10,000 gallons, you could take 30,000 gallons. It's basically in the process of the plant. There's holding tanks up front, so if you get more, you bleed it in slowly. If you don't, you get the same unit processes, you get the same staff, pretty much. It's not a big issue with a wastewater plant. Most wastewater plants will do that anyway. If they build a wastewater plant, they'll go ahead and put in a septic receiving facility to take that capacity for that reason, because it generates additional revenue at a marginally small increased cost. Jeff?
Yeah, one of the things that, I don't want to take you off track, but one of the things that I would like to understand, and I don't, is Chatham. Okay, here Chatham's got a fairly large treatment plant, and yet they're not taking septage.
No, they do take septage.
Yeah, but they're not accepting septage from kind of all around.
They take it from Chatham people only.
Yeah, but they're not, but there's a big plant there. What he's explaining is in a much smaller plant, we can bleed in, you know, maybe 30,000 gallon a day, we can buffer that in. But Chatham is saying, if you're not from Chatham, it doesn't come here.
Well, it's interesting. It's not just Chatham, though. If you look at Falmouth, they pretty much do the same thing. Hyannis does the same thing.
But what I'm saying is that doesn't fit with what you just said.
No, with regard to the, well,
because you said if you got a sewage treatment plant, you can bleed in a lot of.
Well, the fact you're getting at, and I don't know the full answer either. Some communities are more sensitive to cost than others. Maybe that's it.
Chatham isn't.
We're not.
Brian, yeah.
I don't think it was an engineering decision in the case of Chatham.
Right.
I don't think it's an engineering decision in the case of some of the other towns. Specifically for Chatham, it was more of a political decision that they did not want to get into the outside septic business, that they would build a limited septic receiving facility only to serve Chatham. So it wasn't so much a design consideration as it was a political consideration.
And some of that is the location. I mean, if you look at the location of the Chatham plant versus, so, John? Oh, okay.
Sims, did you want to say something?
Yes.
The Chatham Director of Health and Environment who oversees the plant also noted to me that they are running at, while they have a large design capacity at the plant, they're running at relatively low volumes, and you can only insert a percentage of septage. There is a ratio that is acceptable, and given the current low volumes, even if the political realities allowed them to receive higher amounts of septage, they could not take it in due to the ratios they have to maintain to meet the output goals of the plant.
And their discussions with Harwich are ongoing too, which will impact both the wastewater and the septage loads there. So, Paul.
The septage nitrogen content is about 10 times what sewage is. Have you factored that in and allocated the cost for removing the nitrogen from the septage versus the sewage?
Well, that's a good point. That actually
it doubles the load of nitrogen.
That's an interesting point, because obviously for Orleans septage, that's a service that the town may choose to provide. However, for septage from Truro, Wellfleet, other places, who have septage coming because of nitrogen TMDL requirements, and there's a nitrogen limit there, then you're not only taking their septage, you're taking that nitrogen. And a reasonable premium or surcharge or some sort of recognition of that could be put into the fee system, and probably should be, around the Cape, because it's basically nitrogen trading.
I think the point I was trying to get is, it might impact the cost because you have to have more capacity to remove nitrogen than you have here. Where it is, whether it's first order, second order, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you factored, that doesn't seem to be factored in here.
It's not factored in yet, but if it will be during a design level. As you get to a design level, you say, okay, what are we really getting? What's the nitrogen load? And then you say to yourself, okay, the incremental cost, just like this, the incremental cost for septage is X. The incremental cost for nitrogen is also a number. How do we put that into the rate structure to recover it? We're not at that level of detail yet. But, but this plant is removing nitrogen. Excuse me, Jeff.
Sorry, as long as we're you've touched on that aspect. One of the concerns, and you've started into it, one of the concerns that I get from people is that if we were to do this, we're investing $3 million in this, the taxpayers of Orleans. How does the system work to reimburse or compensate, however you want to put it, the taxpayers of Orleans for having invested the capital? Because if everybody pays the same amount going in, then, why are you going to invest $3 million to do everybody else's stuff when there's no benefit?
Not quite sure your question.
Allocation. What I'm saying is, basically what I'm saying is, if the town of Orleans and the taxpayers of Orleans are going to invest $3 million, what is the mechanism going to be to compensate the taxpayers of Orleans for having made that investment versus the people from other communities who are having the benefit of that, but could, under the existing system, they don't pay for it?
Under the existing system in their towns.
Existing system of Tri-Town, it's a free-for-all. I mean,
well, they're going to pay for it if they come to Tri-Town.
They pay a higher rate.
But they don't. But Truro brings septage there.
Yeah.
Okay, and the tipping fee, it doesn't make any difference whether you're from Brewster, Orleans, or Eastham, or Truro.
Well, no,
yes,
it does.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. There's a difference.
It's
a higher rate.
I think it needs to be. I think there needs to be a compensation plan to compensate the taxpayers of Orleans. If we're going to put up the capital, then we ought to have a mechanism to get paid back.
Absolutely. Well, that's somewhat of the following slides, but John.
We're going to set this up as an enterprise fund.
Yeah.
We're going to have a rate structure. If it's in Orleans only, they'll pay one rate. If it's outside of Orleans, they'll pay a higher rate. The revenue will be paid into the enterprise fund, and it'll subsidize the operating and maintenance cost to the taxpayers of Orleans.
That's right.
That's the benefit. We take in $1 million a year at Tri-Town now with a discharge of 45,000 gallons a day. If the fixed costs are relatively, the additional cost is relatively minor to treat septage, that revenue is 100% toward offsetting that operating expense of the Tri-Town, of the wastewater facility. The septage piece is, in essence, will be free.
That's right.
So it's a huge benefit to Orleans to be able to treat septage to the capacity we design.
Yeah.
Orleans would be the priority, and then available capacity outside of that would be something that we would have to decide how much that would be.
And John's correct, and that's the way this has been set up, and that's the next tables, actually. The incremental cost, both capital and O&M, when you have the plant, is small enough to generate a significant revenue. And that's basically what the next sheets say. Given the time, the next several sheets go through the options, and they just take page 8, option 1, just to go through it as a model so you understand what it does. basically takes the capital cost of the option. For option one, of course, the demolition is the $500,000 from Orleans. The other two towns would have an equal amount. That capital cost is amortized down in the middle of the sheet under septage cost pro forma for Orleans, so that's amortized, assuming it's financed. It may not be financed, maybe it's paid out of general fund, but whatever, I assume for consistency that it was financed. There's no septage revenue. Table 3 down the bottom is the septage revenue. Obviously, there's none. So take the revenue, annual revenue, from the annual combined capital and operating cost, and you get the net benefit that John was referring to Orleans. Well, Mike, that doesn't necessarily reflect the real cost of septage to the taxpayer, because then people have to pay the fees. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And
So is that in any way reflected in this?
yeah, it is.
The cost has to be measured not just in the cost to the town, but the cost to the individuals for dealing with their septic.
Yeah, that's, and I have the number on that. I want to give you a number, but I'm not going to right now, because there is an incremental cost of several $1,000,000 a year if you take all the facilities, including the commercial and residential in Orleans, and take it to Wareham. That's a substantial cost that's not in here. It's a cost to the homeowners and businesses directly, not to the town necessarily.
Yeah, John Kelly's explanation here about the lower tipping fee, the question to benefit taxpayers is, how does that flow through, and does it flow through to the homeowner? I mean, you know, and this is, you know, you call up and you want it pumped, and it's X number of dollars. You can charge $400 in every town, and he just sweeps away the benefit.
Go ahead, John.
Well, the problem we have now is the plant is captive to the haulers. The expectations are that a savings for a resident in one of the three towns is being passed on by the hauler when they pump your system. If Orleans were actually running the pumping and we controlled all that, then we would be able to guarantee the rate that they're paying. But that is one of the problems you have with septage, that because we are captive to that. I think the overall point here is, depending on how you set up the enterprise fund, the repayment of the capital, all of that, there'll be an O&M, an annual expense to the ratepayers who are paying into that plant. So any revenue that we can generate as a result of those tipping fees will result in a lower net cost to the homeowner and the taxpayer, depending on how it's set up.
That's right. Let me get to option 4A, Jeff. I think it'll be a little clearer. Option 2 shows the cost up top of a transfer station. Both options that included a transfer station, both if you demolish the existing facility while you're building a new one and put in a transfer station, the cost benefit of that isn't there. The cost of building the transfer station from an interim period of time, given the margin on septage, isn't beneficial. So both options that have a transfer station, we eliminated from consideration.
Mike, just to,
Someone else might build one. A hauler might build one or something, but
and not to belabor it, but as I understand it, if this were ever to become operational, would really limit the market to just those haulers that have the 8,000-gallon tanker trucks?
a transfer station.
Transfer station.
Well, you'd have, of course, the smaller ones coming in and the bigger ones going out.
Right.
And I think they go up to 10,000 with special permits.
So it would be a market shift of,
There would be a market shift. And, you know, there is the jobs issue here, demolition of the plant. There's certain jobs there that, not a great number of jobs, but there are jobs there that come into play as well.
Mike, just a question through you to John Kelly, because I've been fascinating with this transfer station option. You just said two words, private party, okay? Now, John, in the early days of Tri-Town, didn't we have a situation where Tri-Town was at odds with some of the haulers? And then didn't one of the private companies, J.P. Noonan, go to Eastham and build a transfer station to take the market away from Tri-Town?
There were a lot of those situations in the early years of Tri-Town where we were basically losing money, and there was a fallout, and one of the local haulers got together with a trucker like a J.P. Noonan, set up a transfer station to get the flow that they were pumping and put it into tankers and taking it off Cape because they could dispose of it cheaper. I can't remember the facility they were using, but we were now in direct competition in the same area that we were set up to service at a lower rate. We couldn't compete. It took a long time to get that flow back. For whatever reason, I think in Eastham, then they tried to do a transport station in Brewster. There was some pushback that this was not something we should be doing. And I think the rate structure must have stabilized because that's since stopped. But that would be, you know, they're going to go wherever they can dispose of it the cheapest. And if taking it through a pumper off Cape is the less expensive way to do it, that's what they're going to do because they're in business to make money. The impact is on the smaller haulers, and it'll put them out of business.
Do those transfer stations still exist?
I don't believe they did. I don't know that they were ever permanent. I think they were kind of a makeshift transfer station.
Hose to hose, that's all it took. Thanks.
Let's go to page 11, option 4A. This option is probably the best one to illustrate Jeff's question. Up top, it basically has the capital costs of wastewater plant with septage, capital costs of wastewater plant without septage. It includes $400,000 because if you're going to build a wastewater plant, this option basically is keep the existing facility running while you're building a new plant. And then when the new plant starts up, the septage facility disappears. You would actually build the disposal site first and the connection to the new disposal site for the existing plant. And then when the new plant's online, just connect it to the new plant. So the disposal would be taken care of as well. But so there's $400,000 figuring $100,000 a year for 4 years to keep the existing plant running. That gives you the septage receiving treatment incremental costs at 3.3. That's amortized down below at the 178.8 thousand. 200,000 is the incremental cost for operating the septage facility if you have a wastewater plant there already, chemicals, staff, etc. Very significantly lower than the current operating cost of the plant because the staff's there, the facilities are there, the lab's there, the equipment's there, everything's there. So that cost is amortized. Down below, we looked at anywhere from 15,000 to 30,000 gallons a day with regard to septage. Assuming an average rate here, it would be ratcheted. What John's saying is if you look at the actual value, we have to have a value-based septage system, a septage charging rate. Right now, it's not necessarily value-based. The outer Cape towns are actually, Provincetown sends the sludge from its plant here. That's more value to them than it is to someone in Truro, which is more value than Wellfleet, which is more value than Eastham and Brewster. So we need a value-based system. And so how we actually design that rate ultimately is critical. And we probably should have a nitrogen surcharge on it of some sort. So if you look at that, you generate the annual septage revenue. You look at the debt service from above, and that generates in the middle there the total annual cost to Orleans, and the positive numbers show a net benefit to Orleans ranging from, if you only take 15,000 gallons a day septage, to 30,000 up to, between $200,000 and $800,000 a year in terms of net benefit to the town. Operating at 25,000, you're looking at about 625,000 a year net benefit. Now, the way that would work is through the enterprise fund, linked to the wastewater enterprise fund. Later on this afternoon, Doug's going to talk about how we take this. This is a revenue source to the wastewater customer base. That wastewater customer base, O&M, is now reduced by $600,000 a year. The question is, who gets it? That's a significant question as we get into the financial model. Because if the downtown users pay for this plant, then the septage revenue coming in, they could say, hey, that's our revenue. If the town pays for it, then it's distributed among the town. So we're not saying one or the other yet, but that's one of the questions that comes up in the design of the rate structure. One of the many, many questions that we're going to talk about later on. But that benefit does go back to the town, and with an operating budget of about 1 to 1.2 million, that's a significant percentage of the operating budget every year. Option 4B is the regional facility. There's actually less cost benefit to Orleans for a regional facility because it's shared and there's mechanisms come into sharing there. It is feasible. It could be done legally, mechanically. It's much more difficult, and but they looked at it. Interesting assumption made in there that you'll see is, and this is part of the Eastham, Brewster, and Orleans say, okay, we're going to do a regional facility. Who pays what? The way this is set up, that regional model, is to say, okay, Eastham and Brewster, you pay for the facility. Orleans will provide the land and the disposal site. That's the way it's set up. I don't know if that was a laugh or a cough. But of course, that's a negotiating type of thing. But there's value in that site, and there's value in the disposal, substantial value that Orleans is contributing to this in a regional framework that has to be recognized. So.
And Mike, can I just clarify for option 4B, it's still a downtown wastewater, but regional septage?
Yeah.
Right, so it's not regional wastewater.
No, that's right. Yeah. Good clarification. 4D is the transfer station, which we put aside. Table 3 on page 15 is a summary, and I won't go through it. It takes basically each option, looks at the capital cost, the septic O&M cost, the 20-year present value. The significant column is the annual net revenue to Orleans, and there's in 4A, the $625,000 we just discussed. 4C and 4D have good cost returns, but you're playing with the market there. If you demolish the facility while you're building a new plant and there's no options there, given the septage market on the Cape, it's logical to think, as John says, some hauler's going to step forth, or a group of haulers, and say, let's put in a transfer station. And once that station's in, you're now competing with that when your plant comes back online, and you've lost that revenue source. So that's a factor.
How confident, Mike, are you in looking at the 20-year present value to Orleans in your assumptions about fees?
About fees?
Yeah, about
Those fees, that's just an average fee we're using, right? You mean per gallon fees for septage?
well, yeah, I mean, how is the value generated?
You're looking at table 3?
Table 3, the net 20-year present value.
Oh, that's basically the capital costs plus the 20-year present value of the O&M. And like Jeff pointed out, these are accurate to the nearest dollar last week.
That's my,
Given the 6 pages of assumptions, they're accurate. I mean, at this point here, you make the best assumptions you can. This is parametric at this point here. We're at probably beyond a conceptual level because we have real costs, we have real history with Tri-Town, we know what the market is. So we're beyond the conceptual level, but we still aren't at a design level where we're actually building it up from the bottom.
maybe ask the question a little different way. Given how radically different the proposal, the options are the NPV calculations comparable on a like-for-like basis to the taxpayer? In other words, if you demolish Tri-Town and do nothing and just force people to pay for pumping, and they just have to pay that out of pocket, but there's no impact on their taxes from having to pay for a facility, is the impact on them comparable to
I see what
spending
you're saying, yeah.
$6 million on a facility and then having that come out of their taxes?
Yeah,
Still
yeah,
having-
that's a good question, because from a septage point of view, the benefit isn't as clear. When you add in the water quality point of view, the wastewater management point of view, the public health issues, the downtown commercial interests, you add in all that, then the net is valuable. The thing that is missing, though, is the cost to the town of not having a septic facility there. I'm going to get a number, and I'll have Stacy send it out on that, because I had a spreadsheet at one time that put it in, and then we took it out because it wasn't a cost to the town. But that's a significant amount. Now, if you average that among 5,000 to 6,000 homeowners and businesses, it may not be that big a amount per year. But accumulated over that, that's $2 or $3 million you're sending someplace else. Yeah.
Ellen says hose to hose is all that's needed, but I'm thinking about the remaining this industrial, I assume this would be an industrial use, to create a transfer station. What is the likelihood? I don't think Eastham's got any land available anymore. We have a very limited industrial area. What's the likelihood that this could actually happen, I guess is my question, in Brewster or Eastham or Orleans?
For Dennis.
Or Dennis. Yeah.
I don't know that bylaws have been updated since this was done, but I think there was a loophole, if you will, that allowed them to set them up, and by the time the towns got through the review of them, as I said, they didn't last long. They weren't permanent, but they were something new that we hadn't dealt with before, and I don't know that they needed DEP approval. I think they went to the local boards of health. Your regulations were limited in terms of what they could do. There was no zoning issue, so there was it was an issue. And I don't know that it couldn't be an issue again.
Page 16 is a summary of what...
Sorry, Paul had a question.
Mike, in this scenario, you've assumed sewage is collected in the downtown area, sewage.
Just sewage, just wastewater.
And sewage is 99+% wastewater. More than 99% of sewage is wastewater.
I'm not sure the 99, maybe, but go ahead. In the ballpark.
Yeah, I think it is. Okay. Why haven't you considered septic tank effluent technology and looked at a septage treatment plant along with that?
Septage treatment plant with step-steg? We have looked at it. I mean,
Where?
I think, I don't know how many engineering firms here have looked at that over the last few years.
Oh, well.
We've looked at it. The step-steg is a good technology for certain types of land use where you have consistent, homogeneous flow without peaks and surcharges, where you have usually built by private developers, sometimes turned over to public entities. Mechanically, much more complicated. If you look at a step-steg, figure, with the pipe coming out of the house, the electrical connection on the house, the new septic tank, the pumps in it, the float valves, the sensors go into a pressure system. Picture that. Now picture in place of that one pipe that flows by gravity. Gravity is cheap.
Well, but you got a pump station. I don't want to argue the details.
Cities around the country,
I want to get
17,000 cities that I surveyed.
I want to get to a point.
There was never one that built a step-steg for downtown.
Well, I guess the city of Montesano in Washington has one, and it's over 20 years old. What I'm suggesting is you have somebody who is in that business do an estimate and find out whether that's cheaper than assuming a sewage stream.
Paul, honestly,
You
let me
have
address
your
that.
own opinions, but I
No.
think we are
It's not my
entitled.
opinion. It's not my opinion, Paul. Virtually every time I've been involved in a project like that, we have an estimate done for those, bringing in an expert that does that for a living, doing it. Really, trust me, what that expert does is he comes in and he looks at it from his point of view, and he says, okay, pipes, pumps, I'm done. This is it. What he doesn't take into account is reserve accounts for capital repair and replacement. He doesn't take into account the off-site stuff that has to be done. There's all kinds of, and when you actually take that estimate from them and try to actually build it, you have to add something like 40 or 50% to it. And then you end up with 3 to 10 of them around town.
I disagree with your opinion, but I think we're entitled to an independent estimate. What Weston and Sampson did was totally wrong and totally biased. The assumptions were wrong. I'm just asking that we have an estimate done by people who are in that business.
The people that are in the business are selling stuff.
So,
No,
I want to
engineers.
stop this conversation. Are you gonna,
I
what
just,
do you want to say?
well, I don't want to embroil the conversation. However, when we did the study with Weston and Sampson, I specifically asked, and I think it gets to Paul's point, have you seen a plant that treats the effluent from step stag and can handle septage? And I was told no, because the step stag effluent treatment has no solids in the process. Septage includes solids. So you're building a plant that is not, one plant's not designed to handle solids at all. You'd, in essence, have to build 2 plants. That's what I was told.
That's right. And the other thing is, when you do that, you don't have a septage facility for the residents of Orleans.
No, you can add that on. Southwest Barry in Michigan has
we
been
gotta
doing
move
this
on.
for 20 years.
So-
I'm just saying
Okay,
there are
wait,
ways to do this.
So I need to stop us for a second. So I think it's very clear that, Paul, you disagree about step stay. I think that's been made clear. How we're going to deal with that going forward, we're going to need to figure out. I just want to say, from where we are now, on what we need to achieve in the short term, that is, on the warrants and on the agreement, even though you disagree on step steg, those 2 documents, we may still be able to move forward, right? Because they don't require an assumption that it's not step steg, right? It is built into the financial analysis, but there is still the potential room for the town to decide to study it further and still undertake all of the other work that is happening with the warrants and with the consensus agreement. So I want to propose, as we get to that stage, maybe there's still a way forward for you with your view on this issue being different from others, okay? I think we're not going to resolve it here. It's been many years in the, and it'd be lovely if we find a way to resolve it, but it's not going to be today. So let's just hold that that disagreement remains. It may be possible for us to still move forward with the agreements that we may be able to reach together, even holding aside, Paul, your different view on step stay.
One of the things, and then I'll move on, one of the things that happens as you have differing opinions of this is that you go from one extreme to the other. What we don't want to do, myself, Stantec, or anybody, is say that there's no place for step steg or there's no place for clusters. Those are good technologies for the right application in the right parts of town. And we are, as Stacy says, going to look at that. When one of the warrant articles has preliminary engineering planning for the system that would be downtown. As you go into downtown and look at the specific systems, there's probably somewhere going to be an application of step steg. That's how it happens. When you got ledge, when you have elevation differences, when you have different conditions that make that appropriate. We are going to use it if it's appropriate. Same thing with cluster systems in different
I
parts of
think
town.
we need to keep this going. I just ask that this be factored in.
Okay. Page 18. I don't know if you had time to kind of study this. This takes the primary options that we thought were feasible and looks at the different factors, time schedule-wise, in terms of their implementation, with regard to the permit, with regard to the upgrading of the existing Tri-Town facility, and with regard to the construction of a new facility. Thank you. Sorry about the clarity, but it basically looks at how it would be staged and implemented. And I won't go through the detail of each one of them. What Brian is referring to is actually an alternative that came up afterwards, which is 41A1, which is to extend the existing IMA. What's funny, Brian? You can tell us. Extend the existing IMA until you're ready to demolish the plant. One of the factors comes in there is to what you do with the demolition cost for that plant. And there's various options for handling that. The town's contributing to the demolition. To keep the plant running for several years while the new plant's being built is a definite advantage to all three towns. So it's to their benefit to figure out a way to honor the agreement, to put in their share of the demolition, but use it at a particular time that allows it to function while the new plant's being built. The other thing that would be helpful would be to bid the demolition of the plant in conjunction with the construction of the new plant. Then you'd get a lower construction cost estimate for that by bidding it as part of the bigger package. The contractor's probably going to want fill material. They're going to have to demolish stuff anyway. So instead of 1.5 million, it could be $1 million, could be 700,000. We don't know, but there's a definite benefit there to the towns to taking care of the demolition cost in some sort of account or something, and delaying it until it actually needs to be demolished. That's what 4A1 is. Option, the next slide, 19, is the advantages of option 4A, and I would say 4A1, given Brian's comments and what that means, retains the septage market share, cost-competitive septage service to business and residents of Orleans, net positive revenue, maximizes the use of the existing site. It maximizes the, I'm sorry, not.
And maybe you don't need to walk through all of these, because for the purposes of the group.
Yeah, okay.
Really just get focused on that.
4A requirements means we need some kind of consensus of this group to move forward with wastewater and septic. And you can read these for yourselves. There's a couple of a slide on the advantages of design, build, operate. I've been through design, build, operate projects, as other people in this room. There's definite advantages to those, to considering that in light of this, that would take care of let's see, I went the wrong way. It would take care of both short, intermediate, and long-term goals of the city with management of the facility, which we'll leave to another date. Conclusions and next steps. Probably the significant one there is the town, consideration of the town actually putting a warrant article for demolition of the plant on the town meeting on the warrant, because we're not at a point yet where we've made that firm decision. So it could still be that demolition is the way forward, and in order to not lose time and meet the existing restraints of the IMA and permit, that should be put on the ballot, just in case. So.
Later on, when we take a closer look at DBO, we need to make sure that we are considering when SRF discounted interest is available, when it is not, and whether or not that impacts the DBO decision.
That's right. Good point.
So just to finish up on septage, are there any other questions or comments? I want to just be clear that what this group, the level of consensus we're looking for from this group about septage is not the detail of which 4A, 4B, not really to that level, but it's really more to the language in the agreement as we framed it, because I think the ultimate decision
about how to go forward with the IMA without the, is falling to the selectmen. Is that correct? Okay. So, questions, comments about the concept of including septage in the facility that will be at Tri-Town to serve wastewater needs for downtown, having that facility include septage for Orleans, and I think the proposal is for the region, knowing that we still have to work out how the financials of that will all play out. Comments? Yeah.
Stacy, the next item on the agenda is adaptive management, but before we go there, I'd like to just give a little history about septage in Orleans. I was reading the other day, and I happened to be in the town meeting of 1950. And the town meeting of 1950 voted for the first time to create septage lagoons at the dump. And so when people had problems, the septage hauler, and there weren't many at the time because nobody did anything about it, you just dug a new cesspool is what you did. They took it from 1950 to 1978. Every gallon of septage in this town that was taken out of the ground was taken to what is now the area of the transfer station, and I can remember the remaining lagoons there because there were boats floating in them, actually. So, till 1978. And in 1978, this town, under directive, looked at its wastewater problems for the first time. And from 1978 to 1985, they studied the options. And in 1985, under order, the lagoons had to be closed, and we started what is now a 27-year experience with Tri-Town. So we have 65 years of adaptive management enterprises dealing with wastewater. And each time we've gotten to the point where our approach is no longer acceptable to the regulators. And I think that there is clearly a market, and Mike's table showed, whether it's 80% of what we have today or 50% or 20%, each one of those gallons that is currently going through Tri-Town has a positive cash flow for Orleans if we do this right. And I think we need to think about the 10 million gallons that are pumped out of the ground on the Outer Cape, basically from Harwich and Brewster to Provincetown. That is an issue that we have to address, and we happen to be in the position, through a series of actions taken by our predecessors, to have an existing septage treatment plant that has a history that is very clear. Now, we can debate whether we pump 3 years or 5 years or 10 years or 11. The fact is, we pump, and we discovered, if you talk to the Board of Health, there are many people that never pump. I have just sold some land, my family just sold some land that had 2 Title V systems installed. I believe, thanks to my cousins, they were never pumped. And when the land was sold, they had both were in failure. They had never been used properly, 2 or 3 months a year, never pumped, never managed. I suspect that there are many, many cases like that around this town. So I don't think it's worthwhile getting in a debate over whether we have to pump every 3 or 5 or 7. The fact is, you do have to pump to keep the system operating, and there are people downtown that are pumping every 2 weeks today to keep their systems operating. Now, a lot of that is grease, but if they don't pump, the leach field is gone, and then they've got a major expense. So I think septage is a very, very important thing that we have to deal with. It is part of the wastewater planning and implementation in Orleans. Thank you.
You want to go ahead, Gordon?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. I've read that some businesses are pumping once a month or so very frequently. Is that a problem with the design of their septic system as opposed to, in other words, are they trying to use too small a system for their business application? It can't be effluent, because the effluent will flow right through. So what is accumulating in these tanks that require such frequent pumping?
Some of it is grease.
Fats, oils, and
So,
greases.
as an example, Hearth and Kettle, which we all go to, is tied into a cluster system that was built as part of Skakit Corners. Hearth and Kettle has to pump, based on Board of Health records, every 2 weeks. Now, a lot of it is grease, but if you don't do it, the system fails, and you got an even bigger problem.
But grease isn't sanitary sewer. Don't businesses have to have grease separators? So listen, I don't know much about
Yep.
this, but I thought if you're running a restaurant, you have to have grease traps or
Yep,
something.
that's
in there
right,
to
and you
catch
have to
this
pump
stuff.
it, and you have to take it to Tri-Town, and Tri-Town has to manage the amount of grease it gets from the restaurants in the town of Orleans, because they have to relate it to the rest of the volume that's coming through, and you can only store so many gallons at one time.
But it's not sanitary sewer. It's a septic system for
Well,
sanitary.
let's talk about Old Colony Apartments. They're pumping frequently, too. No restaurants there.
So it might be an undersized system, or,
I can't comment on the
Right,
system, I
right.
just know the records.
thank you.
And Gordon, I know that at one time, I don't know that it's recently, but during the summer, the Chocolate Sparrow was pumping on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
Yes.
Every week, okay? Because they could not afford to have a problem or hiccup on Saturday or Sunday, obviously. And one of their problems is that the town doesn't have any rest facilities or toilet facilities nearby to handle all these people that come off the bike path. And the Chocolate Sparrow cleans their toilets every hour, and the folks seem to like that better than the Bouse House alternative. Don't know why. Getting back onto septage, if I may, I think what is compelling about this is that if we can build a plant where we get a 10-year payback, roughly, on the capital, something like $400,000 net revenue versus $3 million investment, and I round that up to 10 years at 8 or whatever it is, not important. But I would, in this agreement, I took from this conversation 4 items that I think need to be recognized in it. One is that there be, that the benefit of making the investment flow to those who pay for it. Now, we've had some discussion about, who was actually going to pay for it, and I don't go there. But whoever puts up the capital ought to get some benefit flow from this. And the net revenue is part of that. We've also talked about capacity and how much septage there's going to be 20 years down the road. I don't know that, and I don't think anybody else does for certain, but I think we need to just establish or decide what a right-sized capacity is for that facility. And I don't have any better words than right-sized, but we need to think through the thing and decide what is right-sized. And right-sized means that we're not competing in the market on price.
What's that last part, Jeff?
That we're not competing, we're not entering the market to compete for volume on price. Mike has made the point that the demand supply price thing is inelastic. I mean, just because you lower the price, nobody's going to ship you more. There is what there is, and the plants are going to compete for that. The other that came up was the nitrogen credit, and we ought to be thinking about how that works in the building of the plant, whether there's something on that benefit for the people who put up the capital, whoever they are. So some sort of a nitrogen credit consideration in this. That's my 4 items. Now, it's right-sized, not competing on price, benefit flows to those who pay, and nitrogen credit. That's 4, I think.
Okay. Got it? Yeah.
I think we need to emphasize in the financial analysis separation of collection versus treatment. That's really, really important because we're having two different debates here, and I want to make sure everyone is clear in their mind when we're talking about the financial analysis that the two issues are very separate, and the financial model will take that into account, which leads to my second point, which is to ensure that in looking at these options, we generate a true like-for-like comparison among the options over the 20-year period that we're talking about. Because it's still unclear to me when it comes down purely to cost to the average taxpayer, to the average household, which of these options is more or less expensive, because some generate returns to the town, some are purely expenses, and the burden between the two, both in terms of the absolute cost and then how we divvy it up in betterment and taxes, is still completely unclear and isn't giving us right now the opportunity to do a true like-for-like comparison. So we need to focus on that.
Yeah, and just to be clear, the thing that's missing from that comparison is the cost of pumping and how that would change with whether it going to Tri-Town or going somewhere
and
further.
The contingency of having your system fail if you don't.
Yeah.
On that last point, Joshua, you mean with regard to what? The risk of failure of the system?
Right.
People might pump less if they're paying more. To go to Wareham, they might pump less.
Yeah. Or as we've heard here, some people just don't pump.
Yeah.
And if there's increased regulatory scrutiny,
Yeah.
and people are forced.
That's very true. Then we'll get to that when we get to the financial stuff. Good point.
And just, so these are all great points. Can I just say one thing, Joe, about Josh, about your point? Because it seems to me that adding this in just make the disparity among the choices greater. It doesn't change the disparity. Is that, like, the cost of tearing it down, for example, is currently listed as negative net value.
Right.
If
To
we
the
add
town.
this in, that negative just becomes more negative. Because the
it's-
taxpayers are gonna also be paying more.
It's modeled out as being negative to the town as a whole.
Right.
It's not modeled out to being a net cost over 20 years to the average household, right? That might be positive if you don't have to pay taxes on $50 worth of capital spending, if you only have to pay $500 every 4 years to pump. But there might be other costs involved in there that we don't see right now.
Okay.
Or there might be some net benefits that we get as a result of building the plant in the form of lower taxes or something like that. But
Okay.
we're not there
Good.
yet.
These are, so this is like fabulous principal level stuff that fits well within the way where we are, right, in our agreement. To make sure that we can't right now tell you the precise numbers of all the things and everybody signs off on that, right? That's not where we're gonna be in this process. But where we are gonna be is that we all know that the core principles of how we do this are going to conform to the concepts that you guys can identify. So this is great. Any comments or other thoughts on this? Or any others that people would want to add? All right, so we'll come back to this when we get to the agreement. For now, let's move to adaptive management. We had planned on doing it before the break. Should we take a break first?
Yes.
People want a break?
We need to
Right, so
adaptive
it's
management.
10, 15-minute break, and then we'll come back.